What is up, everybody, and welcome back to yet another live stream, episode 102, as we keep marching along week by week. And I thank you, as always, for taking the time and spending it here with me. Right away, let's go see who's here in the crew. We got Paul, master moderators in the house. I thought I fixed this, man. See, I had to check it, but it's like, let's do this right. All right. Let's get this going here. Okay, that looks good. All right, I wanted to check that out. Well, my name's Lewis, also known as MrCameraJunkie. If this is your first time here, I would highly advise you to introduce yourself in the chat so you can get the nice Camera Junkie welcome from the Camera Junkie crew. And as always, where I remind you to upgrade your skills before your gear. All right. And after Mr. Duncan, we have Mr. Sarkeesian hanging out here saying evening fam. Everyone's saying hi to everyone. We got Randy here saying hello. Mr. Robert is in the house saying hello to everyone. And so is John. Nice to see everyone hanging out here as we wait for everyone else to come in. Today, I am going to be talking about dual base ISO, and this is something that was asked of me by Mr. none other than John, right here, John Van de Voort. So we're going to get into it as per last week for the new type of show flow. I'm going to be doing my soliloquy and I'm going to be getting into it real quick to have the podcast, Camera Junkie podcast recording bit. And then hopefully this week, I will remember to do the C.I.T.Y.S.G.A.W like as part of it to kind of close out my thoughts. And then I will be jumping back into the chat and checking the Q&A. If you haven't done so already, please do so and make sure that you, I don't even have the sound effects. Make sure you hit that like button. It goes a long way. And if you do have any questions about tonight's subject or anything at all, because I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have, please put a Q colon in front of them so that I can find them easily through the chat as I scan once I get to that section of the live stream. And with that being said, we're going to get things rocking and rolling. And I'm going to take, like a brief pause and get right into it. Hello and welcome to yet another podcast. My name's Lewis, also known as Mr. Camera Junkie. And today we're going to be talking about dual base ISO. What it is and how to use it. Now, to better explain what dual base ISO for someone who might not be familiar with this terminology, we're going to have to take it back to what is ISO in the first place. And ISO in newer digital cameras is the way that we reference the amount of light sensitivity that your sensor is actually receiving and being able to render out an image. Now, this goes back from the days of film cameras, because before we called it ISO, it was called ASA, which was the standard of how sensitive the film that you were putting into your 35 millimeter camera actually was towards the light. So higher sensitivity film, higher ASA film, usually tended to be more expensive for the simple reason that it gave you the ability to render images at night. This has a lot to do with the type of lenses that you were using, and that's a subject for another day of the reason why we call high aperture lenses fast glass, because it allowed you to use higher sensitivity film and you would have to increase the shutter to get the correct exposure. But that could be a conversation for another day. But a lot of the film that we would purchase would have the rating, an ASA 200 was actually like a standard daytime film that you would get, and it would be less expensive. But because of the 200 rating on the film itself, you needed a lot of light to be able to burn the image that you were trying to capture into that film, meaning bright daylight or heavy flash with not the fastest shutter speed to be able to utilize that type of film. Because people were doing events, weddings, low light situations, and trying to do even astrophotography, you would then invest into higher sensitivity film to be able to pair that with a nice lens and render out images in very low light or even at night. And that's what the rating of ASA was when it came to film. Now, this carried over because the actual term ISO can be, whether you call it ESO, ISO, or ISO, it's all the same thing. And ISO actually stands for International Organization for Standardization, right? And I think that's how it is said, but it's basically an organization to standardize all ratings throughout a variety of different devices in a variety of different fields. And when it came to camera and film and photography, the ISO standards now changed the ASA to ISO to regulate the standard of sensitivity that the film would be depending on the brand that you would purchase it. Because whether you were purchasing Fujifilm film or Kodak film, there was differences between the manufacturing processes, so they were trying to standardize the way that we were able to consume and get a replicable or like a repeatable type of experience with the film that we would purchase, no, across all brands. So now that ASA was converted to ISO, we now converted the same terminology ISO to the standard that we use with our DSLR and now mirrorless cameras, because we replaced all of the film that we used to have to carry, develop, and then just an entire different workflow, right? Like that you wouldn't be able to see it with the new digital cameras as soon as we started moving to DSLRs, what stands for digital single lens reflex cameras. So now that we've covered a little bit about what the ISO stands for, now you can see how the sensor itself has a rating on how much sensitivity of the light you would actually be hitting onto the sensor when you're utilizing the camera. One thing that I have to mention is that the higher the ISO value, whether it be on film or through your digital camera, would introduce what we call grain or noise. So the higher your ISO value and the sensitivity of the film or sensor, you would then actually be able to, like, what you would try to do is eliminate noise, which is what you would need to get the cleanest image. Now, higher ISO films and higher ISO sensitivity on your camera will introduce what we call grain and noise. It's just a byproduct of trying to render an image in low light. And what we try to do as photographers and videographers is constantly keep our ISO value as low as possible, because even though the slower films at the ISO 200s would require more light, one byproduct of the more light was that you would get a much cleaner image. And that still holds true till today with our digital and mirrorless cameras. So most cameras are going to have your base ISO starting at around 100. So for example, my Sony A7R2, I use that camera for my portrait photography, It has a base ISO of 100, yet it does have the option to go under the base ISO. Even though I were to drop it down to ISO 64 and I believe ISO 50 that camera has, I understand that the same way that you would add digital grain, so to speak, by asking it to go above ISO or the native ISO on the camera 100, any steps above it is going to introduce, more and more noise or grain. That at this moment, what is happening is that it's digitally trying to give me an even cleaner image, but it works as a negative because it adds artifacting, which is the same thing as, as noise or grain. So even though I have the ability to hypothetically render an image with a lower ISO than 100, the camera's base ISO, which is the frequency which is best derived for whether it be the film or the sensor, and the frequency of light that is being captured, is going to give you the cleanest image without noise or grain at base ISOs. So when it came to photography and video, prior to this new wave of digital cameras, we only had one type of base ISO, which was just the one that was native to the camera, and that would change depending on the mode that you're actually utilizing it. Because even though my camera is base ISO 100, that is for 8-bit video and photography, if I were to switch the mode into S.G.A.W, which is Sony's log file for that camera, the base ISO now changes to 800, because the 800 ISO on that camera is the ISO that is going to give you the cleanest image in log with the biggest range, or the biggest range of dynamic range or visible light that the sensor can capture. So this will allow you to capture the best low light and highlights within the image while you're shooting video when it comes to that camera. So hopefully at this point you followed along with me and understand what the meaning of the sensitivity or ISO is. Now that we're here is where we can now explain dual gain ISO. Because what dual gain ISO is something that's been introduced now with digital cameras, that the higher you go on that ISO dial, you get to a point where the camera kind of resets through frequency and gives you a clean image, even though it's being utilized at a high sensitivity. So I believe the king of dual base ISO right now when it comes to content creation on a YouTube type platform is the Sony FX3. This camera is infamous for being able to get very good low light images, and I believe from base 800 on S.G.A.W, it resets to a clean ISO at 25,000 or no 12,800, which is bonkers. And what this does is that it increases the sensitivity of the sensor on the camera so much that it's allowing you to render images at extremely low light. And once you reach this level of, I believe, 12,800, the camera resets and cleans up all of the digital noise, and you get extremely clean and usable files, even to the point where now, to maintain a constant shutter, depending on how you're filming, there might be situations that at night you will need to use a and defilter, because you're flooding the sensor with so much light that you would be blowing out your backgrounds. And the advantage of this is basically shooting at a clean file ISO at nighttime, which was prior to this point pretty much unheard of. Now, Panasonic and a lot of other brands have been using dual base ISO for a long time. Some of them are from like 200 and then at 800. Sony's latest camera, the Sony FX30, has a dual base, I believe, at from 200, and then it cleans up again at 2500. So, what the dual base ISO and what it gives you the ability to do is basically pretend like you're shooting at 12 noon at the day to get the cleanest image on your sensor, even though you're working at night or at extremely low levels. Now, this has to do, in this camera particular, we're talking about the FX3, that it has a 12 megapixel sensor and it's got big photo sites to receive all of this light. So it's designed for it. But the fact that it cleans up again at a higher ISO when we've already increased the levels, and it's pretty remarkable. I highly advise you to look for some of this footage yourself if you haven't seen it, because the difference between the ISO level just beneath that, when it resets, you can see a dramatic difference in the quality of image from something that is basically unusable to something that should be easily be able to use on variety of different footage or variety of different applications. So whether it's astrology video, it's something that is now very obtainable because of these types of dual base ISOs. So it is like being able to, if I can bring your mind back to the days of film, it is almost like being able to carry around another set of, ISO 1600 or ISO 3200 type film, but still get the quality of the ISO 200, like if you were shooting in the middle of the day, getting your sensor full or your film flooded with light to get the cleanest image possible. And that is the advantages of the dual base ISO. When it comes to low light videography, this is like a heaven sent, for the simple reason that you have the ability to get a fast lens and basically shoot with extremely low light. And I've even seen some examples of films being shot entirely by moonlight. And if I've mentioned him before on the channel, Josh Yo from the channel Make Art Now, he definitely did an amazing job shooting an entire clip with only moonlight and a singular like LED orb, and the quality and the image that you're getting off of these devices is pretty remarkable. So that is the biggest advantage of dual base ISO. It allows you to get the cleanest image possible in low light environments, which really do come into play a lot more than you would think, because it's not always nighttime that you would be utilizing this. If you're actually shooting a film or something of that sort, like a documentary, you'd be able to get usable images in like indoors in a grungy type of environment. So it will really allow you to build the story with the images that, like something as simple as one window light in a, and this is just an example, but just if you could imagine a broken down warehouse where all you have is broken windows with slivers of natural sunlight coming in, that would not be something ideal for either photography or video. But with the ability to crank up, your ISO sensitivity and get a clean usable image at such a high ISO range, no matter what brand or camera that it is that you're using, if you have the capability of dual base ISO, it really is a game changer, because you'll be able to get the shot that you want, because you'll be able to get an image that looks more to the native eye than more of our previous cameras that we had up to this point. And with that being said, I hope that helps anyone out who's been looking to get a little bit more information or a better understanding on what dual base ISO. Hopefully I did a good job in explaining it. And before we close out today's episode, we're going to go back to C.I.T.Y.S.G.A.W, which is channels that I think you should go and watch. And seeming that we're talking about videography and cameras, today I am going to be talking about, let me see here, none other than Mr. Brandon Washington from B.Wash Media. All right, so let's go to here. All right. And this is Brandon Washington. He is very close to hitting 100,000 subscribers on his channel, so a preemptive congratulations for hitting that milestone. It's pretty much just a matter of time now. But I've been following Brandon Washington for years now, like a couple of years at least, maybe more. But as a photographer and videographer, he is someone that I've been able to learn a lot from, and I highly recommend you check out his channel. He is on YouTube under B.Wash Media. And like I said, he started in, I believe he's based out of Texas, but he started in real estate photography and videography, and that's where he was actually doing a lot of the demos. And because I've had some inquiries myself for real estate photography and video, I started looking on the University of YouTube for information to kind of brushing up my skills in this department. And that's when I ran across Mr. Washington here, and he's actually done very well and been very lucrative with his business. But on top of that, he's also been a persistent content creator on this platform. And like I said before, I've learned a lot from his channel, so I highly recommend you check it out. From Canon to Sony to Red cameras, he's pretty much part of the Camera Junkie crew, an honorary member. So I definitely recommend you check out his channel if you haven't done so already. So for this week's C.I.T.Y.S.G.A.W channels that I think you should go and watch, we have Mr. Brandon Washington from B.Wash Media. And with that, I want to thank you for hanging out with me and listening to this podcast. You can find me, and I'm not even sure how to end podcasts, so let me try that again. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to subscribe and leave me a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to me at the moment. It is highly appreciated. Once again, my name's Lewis, and I will see you all next week. All right. I don't know if that's going to be my actual outro for the podcast, but we live and we learn. We'll see how that works out, but that's going to be it. Once again, like I said, if you guys have any questions about what was talked about or anything at all, please be sure to put a Q colon, but I'm going to get back to the chat here to see who's here. We got Tom Bizzle in the house, Mr. BZ. Okay, and we have Sean here also saying what's up. Okay, thank you, Paul, for handling that. I did see it in the Discord, so I appreciate you. D's here says door kicked in. He says, I love my dual bass ISO on the FX3. Keeps my man cave very moody at 3600K at 7%. I need that. You see, 12,800. Yes, so I was right. 12,800 in order to maintain the f4 on my lens. I have too much bokeh. And Michael says, nice outro. Okay, so maybe I can work it in, right? All right, man. All right, so with that being said, today there's so much going on. It says some podcasts last as long as the live streams. Some do, but I don't know how I'm even going to be working my podcast. I'm just going to be doing like my thoughts and things like that. But I've seen podcasts in a variety of different sizes. I'm just getting started. So we'll see how this goes. And here's another thing, guys. If you have any topics, right, that you want me to cover, that you want me to answer, something that you want clarification on, and just want my thoughts on it at all, please make sure to just leave a comment or leave it in chat, however is easiest for you, because this was actually John's question from last week, and I was like, that's perfect, and it helps me out because I just had like an entire week to just focus in on what we were going to be talking about this week. Oh, it's funny. I still haven't changed my alarm on, on the podcast, listen to me, on the live stream itself. So my alarm is going off now at 10:30 to remind me that I go on at 11, and I forgot to switch the alarm to 9:30 because now we do this at 10. And I'll tell you the truth, the changing of time, I think, is benefiting me because I get tired regardless, right? At the end of any day, dealing with Aiden and just life's, day-to-day grind, I start fading out. So the better, the fact that I'm doing this at a little bit of an earlier time, I think is being very beneficial. I think is going to be better in the long run for everything that I'm doing, both the live stream and the podcast, because it's just, I feel better at the end of it, right? So it's like I'm really not fading, even though I am fading towards the end of the day. We're going to see how this works out, but I'm really liking the new time slot for me and for Aiden as well. I'm also going to see how the recording went because Aiden has been going off over here playing, on the side, but what can you do, right? What can you do? This little guy, he has no idea how much I love him because I just sit here and I watch him play, and it's just like the best part of my day. So, but the best part of my nights happens to be this live stream. I absolutely love hanging out with you guys, and this is always the best part of my week. So it doesn't look like you guys have any questions. Maybe you guys have any corrections. Was there anything that I said that maybe could use a little bit more clarification? Because John says, thanks for covering the topic. I've been using the A7S3, learning about the camera setting. Dual base ISO is a great feature for Sony cameras. Yeah, and they're not the only one who has it. Like, that's what I'm saying. Panasonic, I believe, is one of the first ones to start utilizing it. The guy I mentioned, Josh Yo, he used it on I think it's a Blackmagic, right? And then there's also other tricks that you can use because this has not particular to do with the dual base ISO, but you can use it in conjunction to get even better images in low light, which is one of the things that Joshio actually did, which is we always talking about doubling our frame rate to get the most natural motion blur possible, right? So if we're shooting at 24 frames a second, go 1/50 on your shutter speed to achieve that, 1 to 2, like, or 2 times the shutter, or the 180 shutter angle, the closest that you can get to that. Then if you're shooting at 30 frames a second, you go 1/60. If you're shooting at 60 frames a second, then it's recommended you go to 125 over, so that you're actually still getting a natural motion blur because of the doubling of the frame rate, even though you're at 60 frames per second. The crazy thing is that if you were able to utilize a high ISO, like a high dual base ISO where you're getting a clean image, what you can also do is match it 1-to-1 if you're not moving too much. So if you're shooting in extremely low light, you could actually use your shutter speed to match the actual like frame rate that you're doing. So if you are shooting at either 24 or 30 frames a second, I would recommend 30 just because it's an exact number. Then you can drop your shutter speed down to 30, 1/30th. So what you lose is the motion blur, right? And you can get what we call a little bit of smearing, where it looks like, ghosting, where the image is dragging because the shutter speed is that slow. But if you're doing like a static shot, like if just somebody sitting, or somebody just standing looking off into the distance, or somebody sitting in a vehicle, and you have the camera locked off on the tripod, this is something that is very doable. And this is what we mention about know the rules, so you know when to break them. And if you're really dealing with a low light environment, you can actually eke out a little bit more of like light, or an extra like half a stop of light by cranking down your shutter speed and making it like extremely slow to match your current frame rate. So there's a tip for anyone who could use that. Or Randall said I did a good job explaining the dual band ISO. All right, well, cool. Well, guys, I don't know if there's any other questions. If not, this could be a little bit of an early night for the live stream and the podcast. Hey, it happens sometimes. But another thing that's going down, for those of you who I always, talk to, tonight is a huge night. And I mean huge night for the UFC. It's going down as we speak right now in Madison Square Garden. And that's why I tell all of you guys, like, I appreciate you all so much. This is like the best part of my week, and you guys are the ones that make it happen. Like, I am the biggest UFC fan, but weekend after weekend, I knew that the time that I had available, for me, so to speak, was the time that I would spend watching these events. But it's also the time that I had to do the live stream. So even though I've been following the UFC for many, many years, right? Even before the podcast, before the live streams, before YouTube itself, I sacrificed every weekend of like watching these events for this live stream, for this now oncoming podcast. And that's because it means that much to me. And all of that value that I find on this weekly event is because of everyone who's sitting here right now in the live stream hanging out with me. I want to thank you all for catching the replays and being part of what we're building here. And I've been looking a little bit over my analytics, which I haven't done in a long time. And that's when I did that, at the episode 100, to see exactly where we were with the channel. And that's what a lot of these changes are going to be, implemented. And I'm hoping for two things, which is like the best of both worlds, which is where it makes it a better show for both you and I. It makes it easier and that we blow up like the channel at the same time, so that's the idea behind this. And like I said, I thank you all for being a part of it. The Camera Junkie crew, we're gonna spread the message to grow the Camera Junkie community, because I know I'm not the only one who is fascinated with these devices. I guess I see it from the aspect of like coming back from the film days, and it's just, I sit here in shock because another little update, right? I sit here in shock because we have things like this. So I forgot who asked it, a couple weeks ago, of how this camera, I think it was Kevin. I think it was Kevin Cox who was talking about how do I like this camera. I was like, I need to check it out a little bit more before I can tell you my actual thoughts. And I've put this camera through its paces somewhat for, I guess, the best that I could in a 2-week period. And I'm going to have to tell you that I am pleasantly surprised with the camera. Now, the reason why is because it is hands down convenient. And the one thing that it is shining at more than anything is the compactness, right? Of how small it is, and the S&Q feature, the slow and quick, with shooting what I would call B-roll, right, out of this little camera instead of having to set up my full frame. So the active stabilization, 120 frames in high definition with active stabilization, baked in. This thing is like a little B-roll machine. Like, I just sit here and I'm able to get like these really like almost macro type B-roll shots right out of the camera. And it's, through the S&Q or the slow and quick function on the camera, it's a one button press that shoots you into that mode, and it doesn't record any audio. So it's exactly perfect. And then it slows it down automatically 4 times. So 4x slow mode right into the file. So the same way that you would bake in colors and different, aspects to the file, you're able to get a slow motion B-roll right out of camera and then transfer it to your phone to be utilized with anything that you desire. So that right there is a feature that I didn't think was going to be so convenient. But if I am doing something simple like a short or a TikTok or something of that form, and I wanted a little bit of B-roll, this camera is already designed to shoot in vertical mode, and then with the ability of shooting at 120 frames per second at a push of a button, no audio, so I don't have to worry about grabbing like copyrighted music. I could literally be anywhere and just record the video, and it automatically comes out slow motion, ready to transfer to the phone, and I didn't have to either put it into Final Cut Pro, tweak it, or anything like that. Is pretty impressive. And I know that this feature is available on all of my other cameras, like my slow and quick 120 frames, no audio, is built into both of these A6100s, and not my A7R. That doesn't have S&Q. That wasn't around when that camera came out. But the fact that it's on this little, piece of tech, and that I am very happy with the handheld, like no gimbal, like literally just hand holding it and doing this and doing zooms in and pans out and flying around, and the fact that it's like super light. I have to give this little guy props. Like, this is probably going to be my number one B-roll camera from here on out, because it is just so easy. And I'm telling you, I'm going from using my A7R2 with an OSS lens, so steady shot with OSS to get that type of like feel and look. And through the active stabilization, I'm getting the same type of imagery that I'm like, that looks great. So it is really, it has really surprised me when it comes to the 120 frames 4x slow-mo that I'm getting out of this little ZV-1F. So there is a lot of things missing on this camera. So it doesn't have 240 frames slow-mo. It doesn't have the 940 960, is it? I think like the the ZV-1 and the ZV-1 is the one that had that high frame rate. Even though you were recording for a second, it was like super duper slow-mo. Those are, added features that made that camera the price that it was. But this one, it is missing a lot of things, including like just added pages for like memory. So there is no memory aspect to this camera, so I could change all of the settings on any of my cameras, and then I have the ability to record all of the changes that I made and save them to a particular like slot for memory 1, memory 2. And on the A6100, it even gives me 3 digital memory slots on the memory card, which allow me to save that the settings onto the memory card itself and transfer those settings from camera to camera easily, so that everything that I've done on one could easily be cloned on another and another and another, so on and so forth. And those are the types of features that are literally missing out of this camera. Like I mentioned before, I don't think it's missing out of the software, right? I really don't think that it's the software's issue. I think it has to do with just the limitations of this camera, even though it's using the latest version of Sony software. It could only do so much. But like I mentioned before, the limitations is almost like a entry-level Corolla, right? Basically, like, just the basics. And because it has such little hardware inside, is what I really think that adds to the value, or adds to like such really good battery life, because the thing has not really required me to switch batteries anytime during the day. Like, I've used the camera and I've gotten it down to 1 bar, but I've been back home and no longer using the camera before it said battery exhausted. So that's what is done for me so far. I released the video this past week on this camera on the vlog test. If you haven't seen it, I would definitely tell you to check it out. And I just finished recording in it the test for the microphone, and that will be coming out this week, I believe. So I should be working on that next. I am testing the onboard microphone compared to a lavalier, and also compared to the Rode Video Micro thrown on top there. So those 3 microphones, or basically those 2 microphones and the built-in microphone, is what I'm gonna be having in that test. And with that being said, I'm gonna go back to the chat. Yeah, it looks like we've just been hanging out. So guys, thank you for hanging out with me. We're gonna call it a night. I always appreciate you guys hanging out here with me, and you guys, like I said, are what make this the best part of my weekend. You guys are what make it worthwhile. So as always, thank you for hanging out with me. If you want to support me or the channel, you could always buy me a coffee. Links are in the description below. And as always, I can't wait to see all of your smiling faces back here next week while we do it all over again. 10 o'clock. We're going to see what the subject is, but I'm going to figure it out ahead of time. There's still a lot of things. I don't think I even covered the A7R5, talking about it. You know, I'm just gonna go over the things that I mentioned it because I know it was released or was announced, not released, announced, but haven't really talked about it because they kind of, they did the thing with the flippy screen. They made a hybrid screen that it kind of folds out like for photographers, but then also flips up to the side for the vloggers. So very interesting hybrid, but like hybrid system with the LCD. But I think I have to, you know, I have to say I think it's good. I I can't knock it just because it's not flip up screen, but as of right now, it looks like it's the best of both worlds. Because this is the one thing about the the standard screens that I do not get, which is the one advantage, and this I'm being upfront with you guys, the one advantage that the flip out screen has. Because this is my complaint with the flip out screen. If I want to tilt this screen this much, like not even 15 degrees, I have to flip it out. I can't do it right in the camera. But my screens are always like on display like this, very vulnerable to getting scratches. So the best part of the flip out screen is the fact that you can fold it in and have the plastic basically protecting your LCD. And now this A7R5, like I said, has the best of both worlds. It has the flip tilt and the protection of the flip out screen. But that'll be for another day. Guys, as you can see, I could ramble, but I'm closing it out for tonight. Thank you very much for hanging out. You guys are the best. Take care of yourselves and each other, and I can't wait to do it all over again next week. See you next time.